this is the second episode of the CSWIR Podcast. CSWIR is Center of Social Work, Innovation and the Research Center. My name is Henglien Lisa Chen. I'm the co-director of the CSWIR. And we are very delighted to have a Kris Clarke from Finland to talk about decolonisation and the relationship using the healing as a way of decolonising social work education, practice, or research. So welcome, Kris. Would you like to introduce yourself to talk about who you are to begin with? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. It's wonderful to be here with you and continue our conversations about these topics. My name is Kris Clarke, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Helsinki in Finland, but I'm not Finnish. I'm an Irish American from Central California. I was born and raised in Fresno, which is really kind of in the middle of California. So it's not the area with all the beautiful beaches and those parts, but it is one of the poorest areas in the United States with some of the greatest amounts of inequality. Also one of the most culturally and ethnically diverse places in the United States. So it's quite a unique area in many ways. So I grew up there. I've studied in Finland. I did my PhD here, but I also worked at California State University for about 12 years in Fresno. So I've had a little bit of the back and forth.
Thank you very much, Kris. So what does decolonisation means to you, and how you became interested in the topic of decolonisation, please?
Well, I think it's important to say that decolonisation is not a new thing. Decolonisation stretches back all the way to the original resistance to the colonizers. So we have to be mindful of the history of decolonization, that there has always been resistance and struggle against colonizers, even in the face of overwhelming odds. For myself, I first started becoming aware of decolonization or anti-colonialism when I went to Howard University in Washington, D.C. I was there for about a year or so and had many very good professors who introduced me to anti-colonial thought, mainly in the African context. But also when I studied in Finland, I took a degree in political science development studies. And a lot of that was grounded in the history of decolonization, anti-colonial thought. So I think it's important to be aware of the long, deep history, the multifaceted history, and that we maybe are at a new stage where we're talking about it more broadly, but that we have to look at the people that we're learning from, the original people who have developed these ideas.
Kris, you just demonstrated that a good teacher can be very influential in our lifetimes.
Definitely. I had wonderful teachers and wonderful colleagues in my classes. When I first came to Finland, many of my classmates were from the African National Congress, from Kenya, from SWAPO in Namibia, and had, participated in the liberation struggle against apartheid. So I was very privileged to learn quite a bit from them. And they really informed my experience studying here in Finland.
So do you think about the diversity of the background from the educator is helpful or related to promote decolonization in some way, Kris?
Well, I think one of the legacies of colonialism in social science is to silo our different epistemologies and our different focus areas. And we should definitely break down these barriers because a more holistic worldview is kind of the original worldviews of indigenous people around the world. These artificial boundaries that we've been raised and taught to believe are natural, don't really exist in the real world. And taking that a more holistic approach, I think, is very important. Learning about art, learning about music, quantum physics will all make you a better social worker.
Indeed. Thank you very much. And let's remind me about in Taiwan, where I came from. They do have a social work training specific focusing on social worker work with indigenous people, Aboriginal group. And one of the leading educator is come from the Aboriginal background to lead about how to work with Aboriginal group. So they are the priority of selecting social worker to work with Aboriginal group. People have Aboriginal background. If not, they will have a social work assistant who have an Aboriginal cultural background and brought up from the group, really. So I thought that kind of collaborative, but also the effort of learning from first-hand knowledge perhaps is quite important. So, Kris, I know that I know Kris for some months, and it's really delightful to work with Kris and learn from Kris' knowledge and experience as regard to decolonisation in social work and the social practice. Kris, you have published quite a bit. You have very strong publication track record to promote decolonisation, especially you are provide knowledge exchange between academic and the community. That's what I learned. So would you like to share with us about your knowledge and the experience in terms of how does a healing relevant to decolonising social work education, practice, or research, please?
Absolutely. You know, I come from Central California. I come from a settler colonial background. I'm a white person. So I've been born with certain privileges in my society. Of course, things are always intersectional, but I consider myself to be a learner when it comes to decolonization, because I think that the structures of coloniality that are imbued in our mind from childhood are very deep, and it's kind of a constant battle to really recognize and see colonialism in our everyday life, in our academic life, in our community life. I got interested in decolonizing social work specifically when I started working with Michael Yellowbird, who is a dean at the University of Manitoba in Canada. He is an indigenous scholar who has published extensively in the area of decolonizing social work. We worked together and would have retreats once a year in my hometown, where we would bring together community members, social workers, students, and various people to start discussing the colonialism, how colonialism had an impact on our structures, our systems, our lives. And it's very visible in a place like Central California, where you have huge inequality, where you have power differentials, where you have a lot of environmental injustice, you have social injustice. So I think in that sense, you know, just the how unfair things were was very obvious, but trying to find a way to analyze that and understand it was something that we built together, as a group through dialogue. And I felt like those dialogues really helped me grow quite a bit. So I apologize for my dog. In terms of healing, I think one of the things that, you know, I don't consider myself such a real social worker, because I don't have a master's degree in social work. I have a PhD. So I haven't been a clinical professional in that sense, but I have been I've worked quite a bit in the community in terms of like needle exchange and different harm reduction efforts with HIV and so on. So for me, understanding healing is going beyond just implementing the policies that structures demand of us as social workers. So, you know, we have a history in social work of being very complicit with systems that are colonizing. And so if we want to go beyond this, we have to challenge the structures and just the whole way that social work has been complicit. And I think to achieve healing means first you have to challenge the unfair structures, the unjust structures and policies, and you have to recognize the histories, and you have to unpack the ways of seeing the world that we've been taught. And then you also have to strive towards accountability, that there has to be an accountability and a way to make amends. So it's not enough just to say you're sorry, but you have to find ways to have dialogue with communities to fix things, and then to reimagine and a new way of promoting wellness and healing. And to me, healing is, you know, where we are living in balance with our environment and with one another. But to achieve that, we really have to challenge the injustice of where we are. And that also means reparations. It means making amends. It means recognizing our histories and fixing it, in a sense.
So,
as you can see, my dog has a lot to say about it as well. You know,
and I don't think we have the same.
We do.
So, link to my next question about how do you or how would you promote healing as a way of decolonizing social work education or practice in USA, Finland, and elsewhere? For example, like in the UK, which is quite a new concept, healing, decolonizing.
Mm-hmm. I think it's hard to talk about healing because we're so used to thinking of social work as a tool to manage populations, which is what colonialism did in many countries around the world. You know, I mean, if you look at British social work, I mean, some of the techniques come from the colonial management of populations in other countries that were under the British Empire. We are used to thinking as experts we know better, and we just need to go out and facilitate this so that people have a better life or learn to be a better parent, rather than trying to build kind of a more equal type of situation. So I think the US has so many challenges and such a broken system that it's very clear to see where there are shortcomings. We don't have a welfare state like Finland. We don't have, we have a very basic kind of social welfare net. But I think one of the things that gives me a lot of hope in the US with in regards to healing is the amount of people who are now working to uncover the histories of social work abuse and bring it to light so that we can recognize how we have been complicit with systems that have oppressed people. Only by looking at our history are we going to be able to move towards healing. And one book that I think of in that sense is Facilitating Injustice by Yusun Park, which is about the roundup of Japanese American people in World War II, which was facilitated by social workers, who did not question, what they were doing. And I think that this gives me hope that we will have a more critical generation of people who will be able to question these policies and this adherence to the policies. Finland is very different. There is a welfare state here that people believe in. There is a very strong trust in the system, even though it's under quite a bit of strain. I don't think words like healing, people are not very comfortable with that, because I think there's more of a scientific way of speaking here. And people tend to receive services very individually. It's seen as a private individual matter. We don't think in terms of community in the same sense, which is also where, you sometimes get the mismatch of, people who, are maybe more used to a collective way of healing or, being together in a family might not be used to only this very individualized type of service. So I think the thing about decolonization is there's not one size fits all. We have to look at the specific context and the history and where we are and how we need to operate within that specific context.
I think that is a spot on, very powerful suggestion about how we can drive the decolonization approach forward as regard to recognize the history and acknowledge the context. And the approach of decolonization is not one size fits all. So it's create and stimulate a lot of discussion and a lot of work to develop, really. So I'm going to end up with slightly personal questions, if you don't mind, Kris.
No.
I'm just curious about you. While you introduce yourself at the beginning of this podcast, you say about you came from the privilege group as a white privilege. I'm just wondering about how is your experience as a white privilege who started to learn about the concept of decolonization and actively to promote, to develop decolonizing social work. How do you position yourself and how others seeing you when they work with you?
Yeah, I can't speak to how others see me maybe, but growing up in California, which had the most diverse groups of indigenous people, I nonetheless grew up never being aware that there were indigenous people because the educational system taught us about indigeneity in the past tense, so that it shaped a lot of my worldview. And it really, when I started working with Michael Yellowbird, it really kind of rocked my world to realize how much misinformation I had grown up with. Though I did have access to a lot of really good aspects of education, just I think the realization of how much my education was based in a very colonial worldview, though I was not really aware of it, really caused me to pause and think. And working with Michael over several years was really good because we had to challenge ourselves in terms of thinking like, what could social work be besides being in an office? What could it be besides these narrow ways of looking at things? Because when you live in a place like Fresno, which has a really high rate of poverty, which has this enormous environmental injustice, the air is bad, there's wildfires, there's stray animals on the street, people are treated very poorly, there's wage theft. You have to start thinking like, well, if we want to change this, does it really work with these colonial tools? And if we were going to decolonize, because I think the situation is quite dire there, we really have to think of like, how can we dismantle this system of oppression? We can't go halfway with it. I don't see how you can compromise with, the extreme environmental injustice that affects you. I had many students who died of cancer over there. And that's simply because the use of pesticides and, the air pollution, which is very bad. and these are things like you really, I felt a disconnect with what I was teaching and what I was experiencing in the community. And that's why I became very interested in decolonization.
Thank you very much. So before we end the podcast, can you give one key message that you like the audience came across? Bring back home message.
Be curious, be open, don't be afraid to make mistakes in connecting with people. Examine yourself, reflect on things. I'm going to be 60 this year, and I think that just going down this path of thinking about decolonizing social work has been a richness to me. It's made me think much more deeply about life, about the meaning of life, and it's given me great hope, actually, especially when I look at the young people who are coming into social work, who have so many ideas, who get these ideas much better than I ever did at their age. I think it's a very hopeful time, even though it might seem sometimes a little bit grim, but be open, be curious, and join together.
Thank you very much, Kris, for sharing your personal, academic, and professional experience related to decolonization with Center for Social Work, Innovation and Research. And we are delighted to have you for our podcast. So for people who are interested to know more about Kris' work, please visit our CSWIR website. We will have a link and more information about Kris to share with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on today.
Delighted to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for everyone listening.